Alright guys, so let's get started. So in this phase, before we even start doing the designing aspect, I'm actually going to do a series of exercises. And these series of exercises basically include the thumbnail phase. In the thumbnail phase, I'm actually going to be doing just some basic silhouette exercises. And, you know, typically if you're designing like something architectural, I like to keep things within a 2D kind of flat fashion. So if I have something like this here, it's easy for me to kind of just think about proportion, size, shape, and just the overall design aesthetic. But a couple of things to keep in mind is that when you're designing this way, it's really easy to make the same exact shape and thickness, right? So if you guys are running into something like this, I'm going to ask you to do this little quick technique just to try it out. It's worked for me in the past, and it's something that I try out here. Is if this is within a specific bounding box, I just want to go ahead and just try to do some other freeform bounding box that can help influence or inspire just maybe some of our design decisions or shape decisions that we make, just to kind of get things going in a different fashion. So I just want to see like what we can come up with here. And these are just random oblong shapes. There's nothing really specific in mind. I'm just thinking about literally just, you know, real estate and all that stuff. So just kind of plot it in here. Maybe something like that, and maybe something that's more of like an upside down L or something. Okay, so with these really, I guess, random oblong shapes, I'm gonna go ahead and start thinking about how I can fill or design a silhouette within it. So thematically, obviously this is like some architectural building, but I want to go with something sci-fi mixed with a little bit of some sort of ancient ruin. So I pulled some reference here, and if it helps, I decided to go with Buddha statues for my ancient ruins. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pull this, because I don't think we need all the other stuff down here. And just so that you guys can see exactly what we got. And so forth. So we got these. Got another one here. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to mark these in one group so I can come back to these. And I also just got some images of like oil rigs and printers. I know, random, right? You guys are thinking, what in kind of combination is that? But the great thing about using an existing architectural structure like an oil rig is that this reminds me of scale. And I'm not necessarily designing oil rigs, but I want a sense of scale in my design, so therefore I have something that's along the same size. But I'm using printers as kind of my design language, my design aesthetic for creating something sci-fi. You guys might be wondering, well, why printers? Well, it's not necessarily that I want to design an oversized printer building, but basically I want to use this as a form of paneling and thinking about, you know, some sort of graphic design. And, you know, obviously since it's like in the future, you know, there's a really nice future like aesthetic about, you know, these consumer products. So I'm going to go ahead and try to tie this into our environment here. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to make sure I have a clean pulled out shape here. So these individual shapes, and I'm going to close my reference, come back to these, and these actually I'm actually going to darken them. I'm going to make these dark silhouettes so we can just look at the shapes. And what's great about these is that I can use this as a starting point to start designing and building some of the architecture, and we can actually just go off of what's existing here. And literally if I were to show you this and I never told you where my source was, you know, you would think that it's some sort of militarized base with some ancient ruins built up against it, you know? And so that's exactly the kind of aesthetic that I want to kind of infuse here. So this is what I'm doing. I'm just grabbing this silhouette here and I'm rotating it, and I'm trying to fit not perfectly within the bounding box, but roughly. And when I mean roughly, it's just trying to get a sense of just general volume and shape to get this in, and that's all. Because these are silhouettes, so the goal here is just to make this stuff look really cool, and that's it. So I'm going to do just a couple of these just to kind of get things going. To speed it up, I'm going to obviously kind of duplicate and try to I'm going to try to get these done as quick as I can. Usually in the design process, I actually do these fairly quickly, just because, you know, I want to just come up with cool shapes, and that's the entire goal here. Is just come up with really interesting shapes, really cool combination of designs. I'm even taking elements from the first silhouette that I just did, combining it together and seeing what we can get. And all at this point is it's all about just shape exploration, really interesting proportions, and things out of the ordinary. Just, you know, shapes that I normally wouldn't do because I'm following this bounding shape here. Now I can even combine them too. Say we have something like this. Maybe if I combined it this way, I get this really interesting upside down kind of structure, right? So maybe we can use this for one of the buildings here. Maybe this can be the original one actually. It can be more square, something like that. And I'm just thinking like it might be kind of a cool command center or something. And this one here, I'll try to kind of get it fitted into another shape here. See if I can make something of this. And it's cool because I feel like I'm just using my own library of shapes, library of silhouettes that we pulled and we gathered just to make our own designs. And so that's what I'm doing here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me, and you know, show me what you got. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. I mean, it's always exciting to see, you know, the different results that you can actually get from this technique. I've had a couple of my other students in class try this technique out, and they've just produced some really interesting shapes. And it works for a great conversation starter too, because something that, you know, they see I don't see, you know, and it's great just to have silhouettes because it's so purely interpretive. And when it's this interpretive, you can do so many things with your design that you normally wouldn't have done if you were just drawing it or painting it from scratch. Maybe I have something asymmetric like this. And this already starts to look very like military gunner-like. So I'm just going to go ahead and simplify some of these shapes. And the reason why I'm simplifying some of these shapes, it's not only just a natural gut feeling that I have, but also I want to have areas of rest and areas of complexity. And the way I'm going about that is basically I want to showcase just some areas where I can have a lot of high detail and areas where it's just a little bit more bigger and more plain, so that our eye can understand, you know, the difference between something that is more simple and massive versus small and highly compressed with detail. So that's kind of like, if you look at some of the references here, if you look at this oil rig, and I were to pull this out and make this, pull out the silhouette as best as I can. And here is the silhouette of this oil rig. And obviously the oil rig is very complex. There's like pipes and valves and all this stuff going on, right? But if I were to darken it, look how simple it actually looks, right? It's actually a large box, and then there's just detail on top. But the actual forms themselves are fairly simple. And so I'm just trying to emulate that feeling or that sensibility in this exercise, to kind of get the sense that, okay, we are designing something that's very structural, that's very building-like, but that's not overly detailed, because I want to be able to sell or convince the viewer of that scale. Maybe here. I'm just going to go ahead and put in some holes or something, some negative shapes. And these can just be structures here. I'm thinking maybe for this one, since it's like upside down, I'm wondering, what if I did something like that? Grab this and try to flip it upside down and see if I can get something interesting just by combining the shapes here. And maybe just that might give us a really interesting, structure that's very top heavy, but there's enough structure on the bottom to be able to kind of withstand all the weight from the top. I'm totally bullshitting here. I probably wouldn't even work in like an earthquake scenario. That thing would probably topple over, but you know what? We're just here to make some cool stuff. That's all that matters to me, man. I mean, that's even cool, right? Like, turning it sideways and multiplying it and seeing what you get here, just to get a variety of shapes and structures like that. And even though that this is simple, anything that you feel like is too simple, you can always add to it. You can always add a new shape. You can always add more detail. It's purely up to you what you want to do. So anytime you feel like, well, the side of that looks just like a simple rectangle, well, I can grab this silhouette here and I can just add some extra details on the side, and already that gives this so much scale. So when I turn off these red marks, look at the range of silhouettes we got. It's pretty cool stuff, like it's a good enough start for us to now get on to the next phase. And in this next phase, I'd like you guys to just gather up some reference that is going to be appropriate to your theme. So if you guys are doing something sci-fi, make sure you have some cool references that represent sci-fi. If you guys are doing something that's more modern, make sure you have a couple images that represent that as well. In my case, I'm doing a fusion where I'm adding futuristic, but it's kind of a fusion of futuristic buildings with ruins. And I haven't quite figured out exactly how perfectly I'm gonna match those two elements together, but I'm thinking I'm gonna have elements of ruins with overlapping futuristic parts on top. Alright, cool. Let's go ahead and save this out. Awesome. Let's get to the next one.